Welcome to Sally Fox audiobook Danmachi-Hell's Forge Metallic Madness. Books 14 chapters memo 13,478 word stopwatch tilde 54-minute read. Chapter 279 Metallic Madness. 990 words. Nobody said anything, but it was obvious to anyone with eyes that they were tensing up at it. Not that I could blame them, since until now they could point fingers at me for not explaining shit as the reason for their struggles, but not anymore. I was just as in the dark as they were, so if they struggled it was nothing that could be blamed on me. Besides, at most they were just salty I hadn't been playing to their strengths like they were no doubt used to, and forcing them to actually patch up their weaknesses. Sure, the low-key familiar made up the majority of the party for this delve, but that didn't mean we'd default to their style of doing things. We were here to seek growth, and that meant getting out of our comfort zones, even if they'd really prefer we didn't. Anyways, we headed to the stairs at the end of the 64th floor and descended them, tensely awaiting whatever unknown awaited us. The dungeon was nothing but predictable about what came after a Monster Rex floor though, and the 65th floor turned out to be a safe floor. One that made me kinda excited at that, as the entire place was covered in metal ore deposits. Like the metal paradise of any smith's dreams. Adamantite, orichalcum, various flavors of mithril, deep iron, light iron, corundum, the works. The contents of this floor alone has to be worth more than all the Valis in Aura Rio. Shark Tea breathed in shock at the sight. "Gimme a moment and I'll tell you," I said as I crouched down and rested my palm on the rigid floor. With a heavy pulse of my technique I got a rough understanding of around a quarter from my estimation of the full picture of this floor. Oh yeah, way more than just Aura Rio. If even a quarter of this floor's contents hit the open market, these materials would practically be worth less than dirt. I'm talking total fucking economic collapse levels of flooding the market here. I said seriously. "Are we taking any of it?" Gareth asked gruffly. "I don't know about you lot, but I absolute 'em," I said before bounding off to go grab the choicest pieces of metal I'd found in my search. Forget the stuff we were familiar with, I wanted the shit I couldn't identify, along with the metal hearts that were the essences of the most pure and magically sensitive metals. These things were practically myths, as they were only dug up out of the dungeon once in a decade if we were lucky, and then always hoarded to make peak-tier equipment or flat out just hoarded. War games had been fought over a heart the size of a thumb that resulted in several familiars vanishing overnight. I felt dozens of these hearts in just the slice I covered of the floor, even some that were of those unknown metals. I suppose it made sense given that this was a floor that, as far as anyone knew, no one had ever been on, whereas everywhere else the hearts were found were regularly harvested spots. If my theory about what the hearts were was correct, then it might genuinely take a long time to form even one for the dungeon, and only this floor wouldn't have been harvested before that point. I collected hearts of adamantite, mithril and orichalcum, as well as few that were from three types of metal with no name. The first of these unknown metals was a deep red in color and radiated an almost unbearable heat for anyone other than me. I named it infernal iron. The second metal was black as the void and caused the very light around it to distort. I named it abyss iron. The third was a type of metal which shimmered in a constantly changing kaleidoscope of colors. I named it mirage iron. I didn't find a heart for the fourth kind of metal, but I frankly didn't think I'd need one, as it was in its base state a level 8 material, only slightly lower in difficulty to manipulate than draconite. It was absolutely worth it, however, as the stuff flat out rejected kinetic energy. I don't mean it absorbed it either, but legitimately sent it back to the source. Discovering that actually took some testing, as I felt the weirdness when pinching the metal but only figured out what it was when I struck it. It was the same as when I'd match a monster in terms of raw force, as it was being pushed back against my weapon. I immediately had a bunch of ideas what I could do with this stuff, with the most obvious being armor. I ended up naming this new metal vibranium after the metal that existed in the Marvel comics back during my previous life. I also told no one about the metal after I discovered what it did. I didn't want to have to share, since I was fairly certain only I could craft with the stuff anyways. Well, unless someone could figure out how to temporarily cancel the metal's special property long enough for a traditional craftsman to forge it. I doubted it though, or draconite wouldn't have stumped the world the way it did. Still, I had to admit this floor was a massive boon to the defenses I could now craft to surprise the big black fucker. All this metal would let me spare no expense on outfitting the defenses of the city, so it might still be standing by the end of the fighting. For example, if I were to coat the walls of Aura Rio in a thick layer of orichalcum enchanted with Durandal property, even I would not be able to tear it down without my technique cheating, so maybe the dragon would fail too. Chapter 280, Metallic Madness, 2. 1065 words. This did, however, leave me in a slightly awkward position. I still needed to get all this metal up to the surface, but despite the amount of space in my bags, it was laughable compared to the amount I'd need. The high wall around the city was about a mile tall and, as I mentioned, encircled the entire fucking city. To put it bluntly, I'd need to have a literal mountain of metal to cover the whole thing. My bags have the room for mana-sized chunks of metal, but not even I could create a bag with an entire mountain-sized space within it. Maybe if I reached level 8 or so, but definitely not now. In theory I could just make a bunch of bags to handle this process, but that just wouldn't work in this case either. I suppose I could just make some large spatial portals between this floor and the surface to make things easy, but then I'd definitely need to share afterwards. That doesn't even begin to cover the ramifications that such a thing might have long-term. I thought with a frown. In the end I chose to go halfway and create a massive set of chests that worked like the vanishing cabinets from Harry Potter, but with a few carefully chosen rules attached. You stuff the first chest with non-living metallic objects and then shut it. Then you open its twin and all the stuff in the first box is now in this one, even if they are in very different locations. I specifically made the transport of people, monsters, or most drops impossible, since fuck sharing. A good thing I did too, since once I explained why I was making a really rushed run up to the surface and then back to the others, they wanted to use the boxes for exactly the reason I didn't want. Like, I totally got it. The very idea of being able to directly skip to the targeted floor or at least near it would make the progress of delving as deep as possible much easier, but I simply didn't care. They could work for it just like always, an idea they weren't happy about. I lied about it though and said that this sort of restriction was the only way I could get the things to work. They grumbled about it and all, but demanded a similar set of chests for their expeditions, but that was it. Actually rushing up to the surface took me only a full day's time, since I could fly without having to walk or run due to the people with me. While I did that with the massive pure mithril chest securely in my bag, those I left behind were mining the metal to stuff into its twin, at a cut of course, since adventurers don't work for free. An annoying cut, given the Loki familiar got 25% of all the metal they mined and stuffed into the box. They weren't alone either, as Otter secured 5% for the Freya familiar and Sharkty secured 3% for the Ganesha familiar. This basically meant that for all the metal being sent topside, almost exactly a third of it was getting split between those familiars rather than used on the wall. The deal was very specifically worded, however, so this wasn't a permanent problem. They all only got a cut of what they themselves mined, which meant once it was only me having access to the floor again, they get none of the exported metal. Once I was topside, I drew a lot of attention when I shot across the sky to the manor and dropped off the box while having Hestia contact Loki, Freya, Ganesha, and Uranos to let them work on stacking the metal up safely next to the wall for when we officially return. After that I rushed back down the dungeon and groaned when I finally reached the metallic floor. I was flat out exhausted after 2 solid days of back and forth highest possible speed travel and no rest at all. I didn't even bother talking to the others and encased myself mostly in metal before getting a well-deserved bit of shut-eye. When I finally woke up about 10 hours later, I put the others' mining speed to shame as I pressed my hands against the floor and fully activated my technique. For the softer metals like mithril and a few others, it was like a tide of shining liquid moving in as my technique liquefied it and dragged it to the chest before solidifying it again as neat ingots that dropped right in. I'd then close the chest, send the go-ahead through the coin and wait for confirmation the contents were gone before opening it up again and repeating this process. At one point I flat out created a lawn chair to relax in while my technique was working through it, since the chair was touching the ground. "Now you are just showing off," Gareth pointed out. "A little, but if I don't need to be standing for this, what's it matter?" I said casually. "And what about us? How are we supposed to mine any of the metal if you are already moving it all?" Finn asked with an annoyed expression. "Oh, so you figured out that little detail? You really should pay closer attention to the wording of deals. The devil's in the details after all," I said with a smirk. "What's that supposed to mean?" Beat asked, confused. "It means we got outfoxed. The terms of the deal were that we got a percentage of all the metal we mined in exchange for moving and guarding the metal topside. Catch here is if we aren't mining any metal, we get no metal but still have to protect and move the stuff. There was no clause that said we'd stop if we weren't mining it, only that we'd get a percentage of the stuff we did in exchange," Gareth explained with a sigh. "Got it in one. The best part is I'm not actually stopping you from mining any metal, just mining it faster than you. You could totally just focus on mining the stuff further away and you'd still get your percentage," I said with an even wider grin. Chapter 281, Metallic Madness, 3. 930 words. "That ridiculous!" Beat exclaimed in outrage. I shrugged. The terms were quite clear and you all agreed to them. As I said though, I'm not stopping you from mining metal, so you have no real reason to complain," I said unbothered. "But you are mining everything nearby already," the werewolf yelled angrily. "I do have a range limit, you know. All you have to do is mine outside that range, simple as that. Not like I'm going to move anytime soon," I said, uncaring how inconvenient that was for them. Even if they wanted to complain, Finn stopped them since I had been following the letter of the agreement. Otter and Shakti had no problems with it to begin with, as they had obviously already understood the terms. They saw me mining this wide area and just moved further away without a fuss. This was temporary anyways, as the moment I roughly calculated that there was enough metal to coat the wall around the city, I'd move on to the next floor, since this was a growth dive after all. At best, this metal stop was a side quest that popped up by coincidence. At the rate I was going, it wouldn't be long at all, maybe a day or so. Something Otter also understood, as he worked at a relentless pace with the mining gauntlets I'd whipped up for him on the spot at his request. It was a fun distraction anyway, so I didn't mind. The gauntlets themselves weren't anything all that special, but were inspired by the claws of a mole with long sharp fingers. They had a cursed technique on them to allow them to dig through stone and metal as though it were water. It wasn't effortless, but it let Otter excavate ore at a massively elevated rate as he straight up gouged it out and tossed it behind him. The Loki familiar people saw this but couldn't bring themselves to lower their heads enough to ask for something similar. It was a stupid choice on their part, but it was theirs to make. Shakti had no such qualms and got a spade shovel instead of gauntlets to shovel the ore aside. She even explained that she chose this shape because of how similar to a spear it was, which was also her weapon of choice. Still, even with the delay on the top side from needing to move the ore out of the chest, I roughly calculated that I had enough to work with during the middle of the second day. As for the impact on the floor, a whole 2 miles in every direction had been wiped clean of ore, leaving the dark stone of the dungeon stone behind and nothing else. The others gathered up their hauls, and it was funny to see the constipated looks on the Loki familiar group's faces at the small mountain Otter gathered and the other small mountain Shakti gathered compared to their own large hill of ore. All right. I'll send it through to be divvied up appropriately, and we can set off for floor 66. Once again, fair warning that I have no clue what we'll find, so don't complain to me about it. I said before moving the ore, with a call to Hestia about who got what. Finally, with that done, we took off through the vast and most importantly sharp metal ores covering the floor in search of the way down. The placement of the stairs were not an exact straight line, as sometimes they were more left or right along the walls of the floor. It was also not always obvious either, and even sometimes looked like a crack in the wall, no different from any other. This time though, the stairs were easy to find, as the opening was the only part of the wall not covered in metal ore but brown stone instead. As we walked down the stairs, the air turned warm, damp and stifling. I held out my arm to stop everyone midway down, however, as I felt something touch my skin and try to attach itself. To the horror of my companions, a large blue and green mushroom rapidly sprouted out of that spot on my arm as I let it. Parasitic fungus spores, huh? Interesting. I muttered as I pulled off the shroom flesh and all before bottling it. Are you all right? Shakti asked worriedly as I regrew that patch of flesh. Not to worry, I hard counter these things, but wanted to see what it was about first. Since I can just regrow my flesh, it was an easy sacrifice to accept. We need to head back up though, because the rest of you are very vulnerable to this stuff. I'll need to make a counter for each of you, I said casually. Do you always take risks like that when you delve? Reveria asked curiously. Depends on whether or not I feel like I need to. In this case, we have no idea at all what's waiting for us, so I'm trading a bit of my safety to scout out the dangers. I did the same with the cold floors before I figured them out, I said with a shrug. What happens when you can't handle something then? She asked with a frown. I turn back and make a counter for it before returning. My mask, for example, was made so I could breathe underwater when I first headed for the water palace floors, I said, tapping the implement in question on my belt. Chapter 282, Fungus Among Us. 899 words. When we got back to the metal safe floor, I got to work designing and implementing an antifungal protection cursed item. I ended up using a mix of deep silver, mithril, and a finger bone taken from each of my temporary party to create a set of brooches that kept the fungal spores from being able to latch on to their respective owners. The finger bones worked to make it a tightly connected ability to the one wearing it for extra oomph just in case, not that most of them were happy losing part of their fingers even temporarily. The only one who didn't hem or haw about it was Otter, who straight up cut off one of his own fingers without hesitation when I said I needed a finger bone. Obviously I regrew the parts one took and even let them see me use the stuff to make the brooches. Sacrificial crafting like this wasn't a favored method of mine, but I couldn't say it wasn't without its merit. With flaws no one knew the deal about, I wasn't going to pass up any possible boosts to our safety outside of combat though. I naturally didn't need the anti-shroom protection since my technique made organic source matter like this my bitch. It only took me a couple hours to whip up these brooches since the technique for it was pretty straightforward. Additionally, my Cursmith DS being as high as it was meant I could craft simple stuff like this in my sleep. We headed down the stairs again with me at the front of the party, and other than Otter, who implicitly trusted me and my work, the others were cautious about stepping into the barely visible floating spores. Once they saw Otter perfectly fine though they relaxed a bit and we finally stepped onto the 66th floor proper. It was mushrooms for as far as the eye could see. And I don't mean the small kind either but shrooms towering like redwoods with caps that even had small clouds partially obscuring them from sight. The colors were also frankly insane as there were reds, purples, blues, greens, yellows, blacks, greys and colors I didn't even have names for on these shrooms. Did I mention the almost fog-like dust cloud of spores shimmering mid-air? Care to take a guess as to the monsters covering the floor? If the first thing that came to mind was mushroom creatures, you are wrong. It was fucking mushroom zombies. The monsters of the floor were all cordyceps nightmare fuel beasts with milky white eyes if they even had any eyes. The bodies were covered in various types of mushrooms with a single white shroom shared in all of them growing from the top of their heads. I had no idea what the dungeon was high on when it came up with this floor bad someone needs to cut off its supply. This was not cool. Look, I'm cool with some downright absurd shit but even I draw the line at zombies. There's something about the idea of even the dead not staying that way that was deeply unsettling to me. With that in mind it should probably come as no surprise I murdered the shit out of these zombies. The crazy part out of all this was that the shroom takeover had somehow boosted the power of each zombie to borderline level 7. Considering there were shambling goblins in the mix, this was a very large boost. I would have had to been an idiot if I didn't realize that these things weren't actually zombies when they all had the same stats even with their original species having very different levels normally. For example, the Minotaur standing on the same foot as the Green Dragon, not variants either, just normal members of the species. One thing I was conflicted about as we dispatched these shroom husks was that they all had the same drops naturally. That goddamned fucking mushroom growing out of their heads. Something interesting, however, was the senses of the husks were gone save a select few. They were blind and deaf but in exchange they gained some sort of spore perception. I tested this shit. They reacted to any disturbance in the flow of spores in the air. Considering the brooches were killing said spores by the thousands with every step into them, it must be like giant signs all pointing at us in neon flashing lights. A funny thing I discovered was that I could short-circuit this sense by wiping out an area of spores around one of the husks. They just kinda froze in place with twitching bodies if I did it as though they had no idea what to do. Granted, doing this caused the things to gather from across the floor because of the massive disturbance it caused, but they just stopped at the empty zone's boundaries. I can't say I'm a fan of this floor, this is creepy. Finn commented as he stabbed a husk in the stone and the husk next to it didn't react at all when it went poof. Are you complaining that it's too easy? 'Cause I can totally let the spores fill in if you prefer to fight all these things at once. I said, and he hurriedly shook his head. Chapter 283, Fungus Among Us, 2. 970 words. Best not, he said quickly as he looked at the dozens of husks at the edge of the bubble of emptiness. Thought so. I said with a chuckle. As much as I'd like to say things got interesting in the next 3 floors, I would be lying if I did. The dungeon went all in on this whole spore zombie thing, and once the spores were cleared out, the husks themselves basically stood still and let you kill them. If they weren't surprisingly durable in all but the usual monster-killing way, it would have been downright disappointing. I'd collected plenty of the shroom drops after these things were puffed out of existence since I was fairly certain they were medicinal, but otherwise my biggest gain here was in smoke content. My gut told me that I'd reached roughly a quarter of my goal for this trip, which was slightly annoying but understandable. After hitting level 6, my need for smoke to increase my stats was through the fucking clouds. Even the hundreds of peak level 6 monster kills from floors 66 to 69 only gave me a bit over a quarter what I needed. If the pattern holds, this next floor has a monster Rex in it. Once it's dead, all of you except Otter need to head topside as your part here should be over. I said seriously as we stood on the threshold of the stairs going to the 70th floor. What's that supposed to mean? Finn asked with a frown. Each monster Rex is stronger than the previous one as a rule. Well, the last one was at the peak of level 7 and might have been close to beginning level 8. That means this one will be level 8 and likely not a weak 8 either. You lot are all here to level up, and I guarantee this thing dying will count enough for it since it'll be 2 levels higher than you. So like I said, your part is done once it's dead. Arta's might be too, but that's questionable at best. I said flatly. So you think you will be able to go even further without us? Gareth asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. I nodded. No offense, but you lot have been slowing us down. Frankly speaking, you shouldn't be here at your own pace. You might barely hit floor 64, but you'd definitely stop there if the Rex was around. For me though, besides the Rexes that are a bit of a challenge, these floors are a piece of cake. I haven't gotten to the point the average monsters can challenge me, unlike all of you. I said honestly. So you think we're too weak to go further? Finn asked bitterly. Yes. Don't feel too bad though. There's literally only one other person in the world who might be roughly equal to Otter and thus still able to move on after this next fight. I said with a shrug. Fine, but what are our preparations for this fight? Finn asked with reluctant acceptance of the facts I laid out clearly. You're joking, right? We have no idea what we are walking into here, so what preparations can we make? We've got potions and power, and until we know more, that's it. I said, giving him a funny look. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't a bad question or anything, but he knew as much as I did at this point, which is to say not a damn thing. You can't prep for something you don't understand. Like if I made a staff to channel my flames only for the thing we are fighting to be immune to them, I'd just look stupid, wouldn't I? While I would genuinely love nothing more than to prep for what we are going to fight, I literally couldn't without an insane amount of luck just guessing. With that covered, we finally started slowly down the stairs, and I immediately decided whatever this thing was likely to be was going to be ugly as hell. How could I say that? Well, because the walls and stairs themselves were covered in gross fleshy stuff that quivered and pulsed as we got closer to the exit. Nothing that lived in such an environment could be beautiful, and I'll die on that hill. The stench that hit us also doubled down on my opinion, as it was like thousands of corpses being left to rot. Once we got close to the exit, I picked up the first signs of what this foe of ours was impaled. So like the flood from the Halo franchise? If my technique's feedback wasn't messing with me, I was dealing with a mountain-sized gravemind type thing. I felt the many writhing organic tentacles and tendrils all over the floor as we approached. Start chanting the biggest, most aggressive spell you have. We have a big one, I said seriously to Reveria. The fight started before we even set foot on the floor proper, as I blasted out as much flames as I could through the stairway and onto the floor. Not to try and kill, but to clear out the fleshy waiting tentacles and stuff that was on every square inch of this floor waiting for us. It was on the walls, it was the walls and floor too for that matter. We needed a safe starting point, or it'd be overwhelming from the word go once we stepped out. Something the monster also seemed to know, as it did not take kindly to me scorching away its biomass. The fleshy stuff roared like a mighty river, having broken through a dam and surged against the wall of flame I had, pushing it back. Chapter 284, Gravemind. 943 words. We rushed out onto the floor as Reveria finished her chant, and a massive firestorm erupted from the air overhead the massive biomass monster. Scree! A terrible wail tore through the air as the many mouths of the mountainous writhing stuff screamed. The actual damage, however, was not all that great, as it merely seemed to burn several feet of topmost biomass away. As for how to describe the thing's appearance? It was a massive span of red and brown stuff with dozens of strange mouths and dozens of tentacles coming from all over its body. And the stench of thousands of rotting corpses did not help matters at all. How the fuck are we supposed to fight this thing? Beat screamed as he dodged a tree-sized tentacle that swiped at him by a hair. With magic, a whole fuck ton of it. I yelled back as I focused on burning away as much of the outer biomass as I could. Gareth managed to chop off a tentacle with Finn's help, but my efforts to condense a monster to the center of the floor wasn't going so well. Otter looked like a crazed madman as he slashed his massive sword over and over again, blending the stuff into a paste he waded through as he moved forward. The problem with this monster Rex wasn't that its strength was really high, or even its defenses for that matter. The problem was that it covered the entire floor and could overwhelm with sheer volume of attacks. As if that wasn't bad enough, it also had regeneration, so I was burning it away only for its body to constantly regrow to push back my flames. In other words, progress was a slow matter. Even worse, I wasn't sure where exactly its stone was in this vast sea of a body. One would think it easy since it's always at the center of a monster, but problem was I didn't know where that was. I fucking hate amorphous enemies. I hissed as I grabbed Gareth, who had just been ran through, and tossed aside to heal him. I know it's hypocritical coming from me, but shit without a defined shape was annoying to fight when on your level. The irony of me of all people getting pressured by an amorphous thing wasn't lost on me, but my sense of humor died about the third time I needed to save one of the tag along after they got dismembered, quartered, flattened, and straight up decapitated. That last one was particularly dicey, as I had all of a minute tops to reattach the head and repair the damage, or Beat would have been perma-dead. The sheer looks of awe I got for that were promptly ignored when about half the floor's worth of stuff had been burned away and the Rex decided it was done playing with its food. Scree! A shrill sound echoed out of the many mouths at such a powerful level that the level 6s directly coughed blood and writhed on the ground as their bodies were pounded by the sound waves. For me and Otter it was only a bit better. In his case, his ears bled as his eardrums ruptured and he staggered at the pressure on his whole body. I directly shifted my body so the sound hit me, and besides adding force, couldn't find perches for damage. I stomped my foot and ice rapidly crept across the ground and formed a thick dome over the one who couldn't withstand the sound. The sound was accompanied by the many tentacles still active swinging at me and Otter to no doubt finish us off. Otter reacted to what he could see and I covered the rest as I continued pressing the wrecks with my flames. When all the remaining biomass condensed together into a solid mountain of thrashing tentacles and screeching maws, I knew we had it on the ropes. I shot forward with my body covered in flames and with a deceptively silent maneuver pierced through it. The thing contracted and the maws erupted sound at point blank as its mass tried to rip me apart only to burn away under my flames. Soon the stone the size of a car appeared and with a single touch the thing was dead as I separated the stone from it, even if only for a fraction of a second. I cut off my flames and sagged tiredly even as the storm of black smoke poured into me, bumping my smoke content directly to 75% complete. Anyone else feel like this thing played dirty? I asked jokingly as I approached the group that had definitely looked better. They all looked at me silently with confused expressions and I slapped my forehead as I realized they were all still deaf. I finally fixed all the quite extensive damages to them 10 minutes later since there was some delicate work involved. Now then, anyone else feel like that thing played dirty? I asked again. I felt my organs shaking that whole time. Reveria said with a particularly unhappy look. Sonic attacks are especially nasty like that. Never used them myself, but I played with the idea for a while. C-sound doesn't stop when it hits things but goes through and around them. At high enough levels it's enough to destroy even the world in theory. Obviously this wasn't at that level, but it was more than enough to render sixes like you lot on the verge of death. Probably would have killed you if I hadn't put up a buffer. I said seriously. Chapter 285, Rest Before Advancing. 980 words. Are you sure that was enough to qualify for a level up? Finn asked, changing the subject. Should be. That was a genuine level 8 after all. I mean, sure, I did most of the work with my flames, but the sheer fact you survived the thing is a huge accomplishment. Plus there was all those other monsters you killed that added up equaled each of you several times over. I said with a shrug. Are we just not going to talk about how he brought us all back to life a bunch of times? Beat asked seriously. I scoffed. I did no such thing. Those injuries would have been fatal if I hadn't fixed them, but none of you actually died. I said honestly. I lost my fucking head. Beat argued. Yeah, but neither your body or brain were actually dead yet. If I took over a minute to reattach your head you might have died, but I got you in time, so you are perfectly fine. I said dismissively. I'm with him on this one. Folks don't survive without heads. Gareth said seriously. You clearly don't understand how decapitation works. Contrary to how it's commonly believed, you don't instantly die when your head comes off. For right around a minute give or take your brain and body are still alive. Your heart pumps blood and you can still think. That's why freshly cut off heads can move their eyes and shift expressions. They aren't dead yet, just getting there quickly. I caught your head within this period and reattached it so you never actually died, just flirted with it a bit. I explained to Beat, who along with the others looked sick at the information. So for a whole minute you are just trapped in your head dying? Gareth asked with a horrified expression. I shrugged more or less. Don't get me wrong here, if your brain is destroyed that's the end. You are immediately and completely dead at that point. Lucky you, huh? I said with a smirk. You're a fucking madman. Beat spat with a shudder. I'm the madman, thank you very much. Are you truly surprised? I haven't made an effort hiding my mental instability, you know. I said, cocking me head to the side slightly. We are wasting time. Otter cut in impatiently. Right, we should go to the next safe floor to rest up since you lot do need to head back topside tomorrow and it would be unwise to make an attempt at the moment. I said before heading over to the location I killed the Rex to collect the strange red flower-looking flesh-gill things and stone. With that stuff gotten, I led the way to the other end of the floor and took the stairs down. The floor after a Rex was always a safe floor, so I didn't expect any trouble and wasn't surprised when none showed up. The 70th floor was a vast grassland with a lake in the center that was crystal clear. The whole place practically screamed peace. There was no trees and no weeds or flowers or even animals of any sort. Beyond a slight circulating breeze, the floor was deathly still and void of the vitality a normal environment should have. I set up a few beds out of hide and bones while creating a temporary cooking tool that was just some fused bones and a stoner converted on spot that created a small but constant flame. I popped my cooking pot over the top of it and tossed in the water and ingredients before waiting for it to cook down. There was silence as everyone rested and or maintained their equipment. I was doing some spot repairs on the stuff, but nothing to actually improve the quality of the stuff. Simple things like fixing the edges of Gareth's axe and Finn's and Shark T's spears. Reveria fussed over her staff's cracks and Beat silently watched the pot bubbling away as he no doubt thought over the 3 times he'd almost died. Getting decapitated must have been particularly traumatic given how he unconsciously rubbed his neck occasionally. The others mostly played off their own trauma by noticing what they were doing and yawning to cover it or acting ignorant. I rolled my eyes at this though, as it wasn't that bad. I certainly didn't stress over getting splattered into paste or bisected. Though perhaps that says more about how fucked up my own mental processes were compared to a normal person's. Eventually though, the stew was done and I divvied it up and turned in for the night. The next morning Otter waited on the floor while I rushed up the dungeon with the others since they were unable to do it on their own. Once we got to the 50th floor though, I left them and rushed back down since they could handle the rest of the way up. Naturally I left them a few days worth of rations since I doubted they'd move even close to as fast as we were originally. It took me a couple hours to zip down to the 70th floor again, and I rested a bit to restore my cursed energy before Otter and I made for the stairway to the 71st floor. Once again I felt the floor before we ever arrived, but not for the reason you'd first think. It wasn't some material in the air exactly, but a full body standing up of hair. Not from danger but from electrical charge in the air. It was pretty clear that the next floor was somehow lightning attributed, but until I could see how, there was no way to prepare a counter for it. I had to stop at the entrance to the floor as I saw what was beyond it and groaned. Chapter 286, I Thunder Mountains. 956 words. The floor consisted of a series of small mountains that were covered in dense dark rumbling clouds and pockmarked stone from the continuous and random strikes of lightning coming down on them. The wind howled across the floor and monsters with obvious lightning abilities roamed the entire area. There were massive six-winged eagle-like birds covered in sparking electricity flying into and out of the clouds. Small, almost impossible to track yellow weasel creatures the size of a medium-sized dog with long sharp front claws zipped around the stones in blurs of lightning and fur. The truly troublesome thing though was the massive stone-skinned dragon napping at the foot of one of the mountains that didn't so much as twitch when a thick bolt of lightning struck it. This entire floor was clearly one I needed to make some anti-electrical equipment for, or we'd definitely get roasted. Without hesitation we turned back to the safe zone and I got to work. I used some deep iron to create a set of earrings that would create a field around us that deflects electricity. It wouldn't protect us from physical attacks wrapped in the stuff, but against loose lightning we'd be fine. The earrings themselves were just curved plates of the metal curled around the round top of our ears with the cursed stone on the inside of our ears holding it in place. It was an awkward piece admittedly, but since I fully intended to dismantle them after we left the dungeon, they'd do. Heading back down into the 71st floor proper, it took no time at all before the earrings got put through their paces. Turned out the things on this floor were very perceptive to the movements of the lightning, as the first bolt that came down and then moved to the side instead of hitting us got all the attention on us for that unnatural shift. Dozens of yellow blurs zigzagged across the floor and we both swung out our weapons in a violent clash with the first of the weasel creatures that were snarling with red eyes and many sharp fangs bared at us. Raju I chose to call them, as they hit hard and fast. They were also apparently pack hunters, as when one was being blocked, two more were mid-strike as well. Both Otter and I had to swing our weapons at top speed constantly without any chance to retaliate, just to fend off the barrage of endless attacks from several level 7 sources. I released ice from the bottom of my feet as we did this because as I thought these things had shit traction on smooth surfaces. The more I covered the ground with ice, the more the things' pressure eased off us as they couldn't put their speed to full use without slipping. Otter even managed to kill one as it slipped and he caught it with his sword, chopping its head in half. Once my ice covered a whole mile in every direction, killing these Raju was like shooting fish in a barrel. They were reckless like most monsters, and even with low level 7 stats beyond their ridiculous speed they were next to helpless once said speed was neutralized. Their normal drops were their claws and hides, but I also took their bones. The fight drew the attention of the birds in the clouds, who were the most helpless as their go-to attack was sending bolts of lightning down at us that then proceeded to miss. We both agreed to just ignore those as a result, since they couldn't harm us no matter how they tried. Eventually the massive stone dragon woke up and rose to its full stature with deep rumbling roar like an avalanche of stone coming down. If the birds were mags and the Raju frontline rogues, then the dragon was a fucking tank. It was slow, powerful, and basically chewed up and spat out our attacks. We'd cut through that layer of stony scales only for a new set to replace it immediately afterwards. My flames rolled over its coat ineffectively and my ice shattered with each casual movement it made. It was clearly a species for this floor, like the carbuncle or unicorn. Thankfully it was slow moving, so we had the time needed to avoid its attacks even as they rearranged the landscape. I wasn't fucking joking either, as a casual swipe of its paw would rend a deep ravine in the stone and a stomp would create a deep wide crater. Its breath attack was also on point for this floor, as it was just pure plasma lightning dozens of meters wide that evaporated stone, air and anything unfortunate enough to get in its way for miles. This thing was clearly at the peak of level 7 and made the ancient calamities I killed look like slackers. Then again the giant was roughly the same in terms of strength and durability, but much bigger, and I attacked it from the inside. I considered making an attempt on this dragon as well, but that lightning plasma breath dissuaded me from it. My earrings were good, but they definitely wouldn't work on something like that. We did eventually kill the dragon by me distracting it while Otter skewered it through the eye and scrambled its brain. Its regeneration wasn't of the fleshy sort but of its armored scale, so that was enough damage to finish it off. I took its hide and lungs before we puffed it by removing its stone. As a bonus, its heart was apparently its normal drop, as that was still there once the corpse vanished. Chapter 287, Quetzalcoatl. 881 words. The dungeon was a bit weird when it came to hearts in monsters. Some you would think of possessing one had their stones in that place, and others you could think less needing of them would have them. There was no definite pattern here either, as it was as if the dungeon was wishy-washy about the idea and went back and forth randomly. Anyways, I collected the dragon heart and we moved on into the heavily packed mountains. My ice came in clutch here, as getting swarmed by the Reiju was not a fun experience. Once we adapted to their frankly ridiculous speed, they became much more manageable. Having to deal with the avalanches from the mountains getting struck particularly hard in certain places made this much more difficult. The thing that made me worried, however, was seeing some of the Reiju get killed by those many-ton boulders smashing into them. The reason this worried me was because dead monsters meant loose stones, and loose stones held the potential for variants to pop up. We hadn't seen any so far, but I wasn't going to trust that it hadn't happened in however long the dungeon had this floor set up. We fought almost non-stop as we trekked deeper and deeper across the floor, and even we got tired eventually. I split out a deep long tunnel in one of the mountains with my technique and sealed it shut after creating air holes to the surface so we could rest and recover. We ate dried jerky and fruit for our meal since we couldn't risk a fire with the oxygen levels in this cave. After eventually waking up, we set out again. It was a slog to say the least. Being merely low-level 7 monster meant we could stomp them individually with a smidge of effort, but in groups like this we had to put in a lot more. We got to the stairs at the end of the next day and camped out on the stairs for the night before bracing ourselves to do it all over again. The 72nd floor was much the same as the previous floor in design, but had a new monster species. Thunder Vipers, I called them, feathered serpent monsters well over a dozen meters long and as thick as a school bus. Did I mention they flew? 'Cause they did. This meant in addition to the Reiju swarming us, we also had to pay attention to the sky for these sparky green flying snakes with fangs like spears that tried to dive bomb our asses with venomous gaping jaws. That venom was no fucking joke either. Not quite as bad as the Nakalavi's toxin, but uncomfortably close. Thankfully it was non-reactive to anything inorganic, so it just hit the stone and slid into the cracks harmlessly. Otter got bit once and I had to straight up amputate his right arm to save him, as the spot on his wrist the venom got in blackened and rotted visibly while spreading up his arm. We ended up splitting the burden, as I took the Reiju while he took the snakes. There were no new monsters for this floor and the next 2 floors, but it still took us 7 days to reach the end of the 74th floor. My smoke collection was nearly 70% full to maxing out my stats, and I knew this was going to be the end of our expedition one way or another. When we stepped onto the 75th floor, I sighed as one of my concerns was proven true. There, coiled around the singular mountain with its body partially concealed behind thunderclouds, was a massive winged serpent like the Thunder Vipers, but many times bigger and having 6 wings along its full length. Unlike the solid green of the Thunder Vipers, this creature's scales and feathers were vibrant in many colors, like a peacock almost. If I didn't recognize that the thing was a variant of the Thunder Vipers at a glance, I'd have had to be blind. It noticed the intruders of its domain as a massive manor-sized serpent head lower through the clouds and stared at us with a flickering of its forked tongue. I don't think we can fight this and win, Otter said gravely from next to me as sweat dripped from him. Normally I'd agree, but compared to what's coming I think we have a better shot here. Try not to die, I said before blasting off with my flames at full power towards the serpent. Peccatum superbi, I yelled as I buffed myself as much as I could. The golden slitted pupils narrowed slightly and I almost couldn't react as that massive head shot forward in a blur towards me, mouth open wide as lightning rippled across its insides. I raised my weapon sideways and clashed with one of its tower's fangs with an explosive impact, though the final result was me getting launched backwards and into the side of the floor at easily Mach 4. I felt my body shatter on impact and had to burn some energy to fix it and then immediately dodge as that head slammed into the spot I just was. Chapter 288, Quetzalcoatl, 2. 959 words. I blasted the head with my flames only for the feathers to scorch black and fall and the scales to slough off with fresh unharmed ones replacing them. This thing was not just a match for me but even exceeded me by a not insignificant amount. Otter made a valiant effort as he roared and slammed his weapon down on the monster's side. Its scales cracked and split while a relatively minor injury opened up on its side. Little more than a paper cut on its bulk that it regenerated and covered in scales mere moments later. The serpent ignored the man however and remained firmly focused on me as it lunged again. This time however lightning blasted out from its throat as I was mid-dodge. It flowed over me but I felt the heat and my hair stood up as it almost overpowered my earrings effect. I created an edge of erasure on my weapon that I swung into the hard side of the beast's face as its form shot by me. A long weeping bloody gash opened as its momentum created a long area of effect. That took slightly longer to regenerate but not nearly enough time to capitalize on. What it did do though was piss it off. The air whipped in a frenzy as the full form of the serpent reared up and lightning and ripped up stone tore across this massive sudden hurricane it summoned. It was unaffected like a god unleashing their wrath upon the world. Not an inaccurate description either, as a level 8 beast would be a not insignificant threat even in the heavenly realm according to the goddesses I asked. Not a lethal threat since gods were immortal, but one they would have a little trouble fighting if they didn't cheat and use their near-infinite energy to attack it. I flooded the hurricane with my flames while Otto was leaping from stone to stone in the vortex in a vain attempt to approach the beast. I say vain because the closer he got to it the fiercer the winds got. To the point the small stones in the wind were whipping into him and leaving shallow cuts. I wasn't trying to hurt the thing though with my flames but contesting its power of the weather. It realized this as it blurred into action as its miles-long tail swung from behind me while its maw shot towards me from the front. I blasted myself roughly upwards and barely dodged the strike by less than an inch while the shockwave of the mouth meeting the tail sent me tumbling wildly away. I would have otherwise tried to use erasure on its head in hope of damaging its brain, but clearly no dice. The bite to its own tail was inconsequential, though ironically the most damage it had suffered so far. I met Otto mid-air and blasted him onto the serpent's back. Distract it so I can charge and attack. I yelled over the roar of the lightning and wind. He nodded with bloodshot eyes and clung to the beast as he climbed its ground form towards its head. I meanwhile had to flee through the air in a manic imitation of a dragonfly with sudden stops and angle shifts to avoid the many strikes of this monster. Something that it was greatly unhappy about, as it had obviously long gotten used to its speed and size, allowing it to catch its prey with ease. Finally Otto reached the massive head and moved close to its right eye, and I shot up as high as I could before clasping my hands together. He stabbed his greatsword into the eye before the snake could realize the trouble as it was focused on me. For the first time the great beast roared in agony and tossed Otto off it with its thrashing. I asked for a distraction and my man fucking delivered. I focused hard on pumping both positive and negative energies into the space between my palms. The very space around me began to warp from the pressure and my skin began to peel off like flakes of ash. The blinding sunlight radiance between my skeletal palms drew the single remaining eye of the serpent and it lunged at me. The world seemed to still as I opened my palms towards the beast and spoke. Purgation cannon. The next moment there was nothing but white void as miles of space simply ceased to exist. No loud explosion, no blinding light, just 1 second existence and the next a sheer void. The beast's head and much of its upper body was gone as the world snapped the void shut and I fell to the ground utterly drained of energy and missing over 40% of my body. All of my limbs were gone, my organs barely within the several holes in my torso and my waist completely gone. The only thing that kept me alive was the massive influx of smoke as the monster's stone had been cut in half. This energy restored a smidgen of energy I used to seal my wounds before hitting the ground hard and groaning. I might actually be able to level up after all. I thought with a wheezing gasp of a chuckle. Otto was faring better than me, but not considerably, as when he was flung off the beast he took the impact to the floor's walls with his arms and legs to save his internals, but was now stuck to the wall with broken limbs and a really bad fracture to his ribs and bruised organs. Still we killed the variant monster I will respectfully refer to as Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god. Chapter 289, Update. 1065 words. Variants of high-leveled monsters were both blessed and cursed at the same time. They were blessed as they were born with power many variants would never even approach. But they were cursed with near stagnation of power. Being high-leveled from the start meant they were already as perfect as they could get, more or less, for their species. Each stone they consumed as a result barely added anything to their power. For this one I'd wager it had been alive for a couple thousand years at least for it to have made it to where it was currently. It was easily mid-level 8 if not high 8. If I wasn't wrong, it had likely only gotten there by camping on this floor and devouring whatever the actual monster Rex of this floor was supposed to be when it respawned. Its evolutionary path had ironically also cut it off from going deeper in search of stronger monster stones to devour. I was referring to its size, of course. It flat out couldn't fit down the stairs anymore, and even after variation monsters didn't intentionally damage the dungeon. Still, I didn't think about this for too long, as once I regenerated enough energy I regrew one of my arms and dug through my scorched but intact bag for a potion. Popping the cork on the vial, I dumped the contents down my throat and sighed as my energy pool started to surge again, though I knew it would take me a while to fully recover it all, especially since I had to regrow my body parts and then fix Otter, who was looking kinda on the verge of kicking it. No rest for the wretched, I suppose. Once I was whole again, I serious did have to rush over, as I could even see the dude's soul starting to detach from his body, which was not a good sign. Thankfully, once I stabilized his insides, that stopped being the case and I could put more attention into fully repairing his body. This wasn't simple regrowth or reattachment here, as his limbs were more or less blended together in very unnatural ways. I found a fucking finger bone all the way up near his shoulder, if that explains anything. I eventually got him right as rain, but didn't bother waking his unconscious ass up, as I too preferred to call it a day. Forget food or anything, sleep was a sweet temptress I was more than happy to let seduce me. I of course covered both of us before I conked out and didn't wake up till a good day later. Otter woke up before that and busted out of his stone sleeping bag and was sharpening his spare dagger, since I sorta kinda erased his sword with my last attack since it was in the snake's eye. Oops. He didn't look too heartbroken about it, but then again he wasn't exactly the most expressive of people, so who knew? We ate the rest of our rations and I took the single fang that was somehow dropped by the thing. Even without any extra energy being added, the thing still popped with lightning and poison. I took one of my adamantite hearts and used it to forge Otter a new sword that was even better than his previous one, and Durandal too, so it was indestructible. We started heading up after he was geared properly, as there was no more reason to stay here. We moved across the Thunder Mountain floors and then the frozen floors over the next 3 days. Finally we got back to the floors we didn't need to put in effort on, and I started rocketing us across them, taking only another 2 days to reach topside again. We both went our separate ways, as he had to report to Freya and I had to go to Hestia. I hadn't forgotten the massive pile of metal visible even from the center of the city. I needed to coat the wall of the city too here soon, and that was going to take some time if I wanted it to stick. Finally! Do you have any idea how many complaints we got from that fool Loki? Hestia yelled as I walked in. Does it matter? Just tell her to buzz off. I said dismissively. I can't when she's holding all that metal of your hostage, she said angrily. That is annoying. Update me real fast and I'll go have a word with her people. I'm sure if I bash in enough heads she'll see reason. I said casually. Somehow that's even worse, she said tiredly. I just grinned at that and we went and got the update out of the way. Name, Alexander Drake. Race, Fallen. Level 6, can level up. Strength, 3000, tilde. Endurance 3000, tilde. Agility 3000, tilde. Dexterity 3000, tilde. Magic 3000, tilde. Spells, Hell's Forge, innate technique, can use anything from a living being and reshape or refine it per one's will. Incantation, Hell's Forge, extensions, Cursed Tool Creation, Reversion, Heaven's Judgment, Domain Expansion, Forge of the Fallen. Hellfire, embodiment, flames born of hell to burn away the sins of wicked souls. Reversion, Helheim, Domain Expansion, Forge of the Fallen. Sin of Pride, through pride all things great and small, good or evil can be accomplished. Beware however that one's pride does not outstrip their means lest they fall to sin. Incantation, Peccatum Superbii, Reversion, Peccatum Inertiae, Domain Expansion, Forge of the Fallen. Skills, Heavenly Restriction, in exchange for the ability to wield mana and magic one gains access to cursed energy and cursed techniques. Authority of Black, permanent great increase to cursed energy efficiency, amount and control. Magic will always start at F rank after leveling up. Reverse Cursed Technique, grants access to positive cursed energy and reversion techniques. Lord of the Fallen that rules the Forge of Hell and purifies the sins of all souls that pass through his domain. Sublimates the soul over time. Large permanent increase to crafting with cursed energy. Large permanent decrease to all stats for each innocent soul killed and increase for each sinful soul killed. Grant skills, Soul Gaze, Infernal Command. Soul Gaze, see the souls of all things and their sins. Infernal Command, sinful souls bend to your will and hellish creatures obey your voice. Develop mental skills, Curse Myth, C, Curse Body, C, Mystery, D, Rex, B, Fallen, B. What did you do? Hestia screamed in horror at the sight. Chapter 290, Level 7 and Wall. 980 words. That's a silly question. I fought a powerful monster and survived. By a hair, but I still did. I said with a shrug. She smacked the back of my head. Don't get smart with me. You just reached level 6 and you can already level up again? That powerful monster must have had you completely overwhelmed, so why didn't you run? She demanded angrily. Because I just needed a single opening to win. And I did so chill. It's all positives in the end, as Otter definitely got his level since he was how I got that opening to begin with. Speaking of how the others do, full levels all around I hope. I asked curiously. Ooh. I don't know why I even bother caring about you, she said, smacking me one final time. As for the others, Aurelio has 5 more level 7s now. Loki has been insufferable about it this whole time, she said as she got off me. Good news then. I'm much more confident with extra meat shields around to throw at the dragon when it shows up. I said, relieved. I don't like the way you said that, she said with a frown. I shrugged as I got up. That's the best description I can give them. The thing I killed to qualify for my own level was at most high level 8, and it had me and Otter both on the ropes. Hell, Otter almost died, and I mean I was at most a minute away from having to explain to Freya why he wasn't with me. Against the one-eyed dragon? Those 5 level 7s are fleas at best, annoying but nearly harmless. I said seriously. When you put it that way, are you sure you don't want to get your level up out of the way so you can go back to the dungeon? She asked, horrified. We don't have enough time. I can get my level up, but by the time I recover from it and finish getting the wall metalled up and enchanted, my gut is telling me the dragon will be free. I said seriously. I thought we had more time though, she exclaimed. We all hoped we had more time, but my gut says otherwise, and it hasn't lied to me yet. I said with a sigh. We'll have to let Uranos know, she said gravely. He already does, I'd wager. He's got a lesser light spirit watching over the seal, so he's getting real-time information on it. If my gut can pick up on the speeding up of the seals failing, then Uranos definitely knows as well. He's probably just keeping it to himself to prevent a panic. I said seriously. That makes sense. People would be scrambling to leave, or worse if they knew, and not saying anything prevents this. But for how long can he keep it quiet before it starts becoming dangerous to the city, she said without actually wanting an answer. My level up took no real time after I prepared the barrier and healing coffin. Nothing really changed beyond my Curse Myth, DS raising a level and me getting the Curse Tyrant, DS. Tyrant was a unique DS that had different variants based on one's specifications as an adventurer. It was also only available to those recognized as royalty or nobility. What it does was also well recorded, which is why I wasted no time at all snapping it up. It was a passive skill that buffed all the aspects of its specific variant. So, Mage Tyrant makes magic power, mana quality and quantity, and learning speed stronger. My own Curse Tyrant would do the same with all of my cursed energy-related aspects. The fact it started at D rank also meant the buff was quite substantial. I felt totally fine after the level up, but still chose to lounge in the coffin for a day before my anxiety got the best of me and I got up to address the massive pile of metal behind the mana stacked against the wall. Beat was standing guard over it with a bored expression that said he'd rather be anywhere else. Finally came to get this stuff, huh? I'm supposed to tell you to come back after you renegotiate with Loki. I'm not gonna though, since you just standing there has my hair standing up, he said bluntly. That would be because I leveled up again. Level 7 same as you, but I have way higher stats. I said with a grin. That Rex was that dangerous, he asked surprised. Not the Rex, a variant that had grown too large to leave the Rex's floor and had been preying on the actual Rex for who knows how long. Almost killed Otter and had me on the ropes the whole time. Only managed to kill it with a last resort type attack. I said honestly. Fuck, we really would have dragged you both down if we stayed here, he said, and I nodded. The next set of floors had nothing but level 7 monsters, you'd have all died fast if you were there. Forget that beast of a variant. I said seriously. Damn, sounds like a pain, he said before just walking off, leaving me with a small mountain of metal. Now to deal with this. I thought as I cracked my neck and knuckles before plunging my hands into the pile and activating my technique. The small mountain of gleaming metal began to melt and transform into a massive, almost bouncy-looking blob of metal that I controlled to start climbing the wall. It was like a slow-moving ooze creeping flat up the wall, visible for a long way. There were several intrigued smiths that had long set up a way to be informed when the metal I had stacked was touched and saw this. Chapter 291, Beginning of the End. 951 words. I sat cross-legged on the ground as I controlled the metal to rise over the wall and then fall down to the ground on the other side. It was taxing work as I had to keep it all moving at a slow enough pace to fully seep into the stone of the wall without messing up the structure of the wall itself. Once I had a solid front and back coating done in this area though, I moved the entire mass of metal to the top of the wall that in any other circumstance definitely wouldn't be able to withstand that weight. I used a thin line of metal still attached to my hands to drag me up to the top of the blob of metal. From there I began to slowly widen the coating on the wall. First I spread it across the entire wall's top like a ridiculously thick ring set on top of it. Then I had it flow down the front and back of the entire wall, covering it with the exception of the gates. This entire process took me 6 days, but given the scale and care I put in, this was frighteningly fast. If I was just trying to simply upgrade the wall a bit, this would be plenty, but I don't half do things. Next up, took out several dozen of the level 7 stones I'd collected in the dungeon this last time and converted before I used my technique to spread them across the wall roughly equal distances apart. I then took out an elixir and grimaced, as this was going to be the hard part. As my cursed energy roiled and sought rupture, I focused on the entirety of the metal covering and infiltrating the wall as well as those stones. With a firm and energy drain pulse of cursed energy, I began layering my enchantments on it. The sea of cursed energy over the city stirred slightly at this exertion, which was annoying, but at this point I didn't care to try and keep it a secret any longer. It wasn't like anyone could do anything to me at this point. I was definitely close to level 9 in terms of sheer stats, and if Haraheim hit me with her magic, I'd not only hit that level but reach quite far into it as well, maybe even to the high part of the level. This gave me confidence to scrap with the one-eyed black dragon, but as for winning? Only do or die time will determine if that's possible. Regardless of if my current strength was enough, it truly didn't matter, since if I had to resort to my absolute last-case scenario plan, that dragon would die. There wasn't even a doubt about it. The cost though was steep. Too steep perhaps. I shook my head to toss aside that dark thought and focused on the enchantments. Durandal, Anti-Dragon, Anti-Magic, and Ritual were weaved slowly and agonizingly throughout the entire wall as I hemorrhaged cursed energy just as fast as I generated it. Finally it was done, and the entire wall darkened slightly before quieting down. The sea of cursed energy overhead also calmed and vanished from normal view. The wall was now probably the strongest large-scale object in the entire world now. A grand achievement in and of itself, made all but necessary because of the dragon's unsealing. The wall of Orario wasn't just there to keep things out, but rather to keep them in. Even if the city were to be totally leveled, a likely scenario, the wall must remain to keep anything that can't fly from getting out. I had to plan for failure after all, and this stopgap would buy the world some time, assuming I did fail. With the wall settled, I was finally free to continue planning for the dragon's coming. You really should try and relax. You are but one man, the world can't rest solely on your shoulders, you know. Freya said as she pressed herself against my back as I worked on churning out anti-dragon ballistic bolts. You say that, but it doesn't fucking feel like it. I said with a sigh as I finished up the bolt I was working on. That's just your power talking. As the strongest you feel like it's all on you, but it's not. You have help, she said as she casually sat herself on my lap. It shouldn't be, but only I have even a shot of killing this fucking thing. In theory Otter might also be able to with the right opportunity, but my gut tells me we are seriously fucked. I'm just trying to make us less so. I said honestly. What else does that oh so famous gut of yours say? She asked with a slight teasing tone. It says we are out of time. I said gravely as all of a sudden the world seemed to hold its breath. The seal had snapped. The dragon was coming. The evacuation order was sent out immediately, and everyone who hadn't already moved away from Orario rushed to the dungeon under the various familiars' control. The first 17 floors were filled with the weaker adventurers whose job was to keep the monsters at bay as these normal folks moved through it. All the gods and goddesses with the exception of Uranos and Hestia went with them. The god's dwelling place on the 18th floor had been built like a fortress while I was deep in the dungeon. I left Hestia with the key to my final resort and stood upon the wall waiting for the dragon to reach us. Chapter 292, Dragon's Approach. 909 words. Third-person POV, Mysterious Valley. The air was heavy with anticipation as the stirring form of the great black dragon strained against the glowing golden seals binding it to slumber. Dense mana of a red color radiated from it like a miasma of dread, with every moment leading a new pang sound as the seals shattered one by one. From the moment the first seal gave way, it had been a race against time to prepare defenses before the cascading seal failure reached its end. Finally, with a resounding ping, the last golden thread of sealing snapped, and the world seemed to pause as the closed eye of the beast snapped open with an ancient raw power that blasted the air. Intense cracking sounds like ice breaking filled the air as the coiled body began to stretch and shake off its long dormancy. Each flex of a dense corded muscle caused the ground to crack and shake, while the clouds above were obliterated from the roiling magical pressure of the monster merely awakening. Lungs took in air like a typhoon, and the beast raised its arrogant head and roared. Rah! The sound, a shockwave that shattered the valley and carried for over 100 miles, and great dreaded black bat-like wings unfurled from the beast's back. With a single casual flap, a hurricane tore apart the surrounds and devastated the land for miles around it, and its miles-long body lifted into the sky. Its red slitted pupil locked onto a single direction with a hatred and rage so focused it practically cut through space to make Aurelio quiver in fear. The lurch of power, it accelerated towards the great city. Its speed like a swallow in dive, it broke the sound barrier easily and without effort. It only traveled for a span of no more than 5 minutes before it detected the first trap set for it and narrowed its eye in disdainful pride as it flew straight into it. Space warped around it as it tried to restrain the beast. Tried to trap it in a loop of area as hundreds of massive black blots like spears were sent up from the small toys it saw on the ground. These bolts were like a cloud as no space was between them and they blotted out the sky above. Magic rippled across the dragon's obsidian scales and exploded outwards with a forceful push of its will. Space shattered like a pane of glass cracking to reveal a sheer absent void of nothingness, and the red magical wave evaporated the bolts and all those toys that sent them, while the trap that held it vanished with a whimper of futile resistance. Without care the dragon began to move towards its target once more, only to moments later get obstructed again. This trap looped it in time, and the calamity admittedly took a few minutes to realize it was passing the same area in repeat. Baleful aura erupted from the dragon at this annoyance, and with a raised head it roared. This roar was different than its previous one. This was an attack. A ripple passed from its mouth in all directions, and space quaked and shattered as time was forcibly unraveled around it. One moment the dragon was trapped, and the next a dozen miles in every direction of it was leveled in an instant sonic pressure wave. With a snort the dragon moved on as though nothing had happened. More and more of these strange traps attacked it, with only the one that attempted to send it to the void outside the world almost succeeding. It was delayed for an entire hour after having begun its journey. Anger at this was boiling within it as it homed in on the insect that shared the strange aura that all of it had. Normal POV. I felt my traps fail one after the other as I waited atop the wall watching the direction of the beast's approach. Otter stood to my right, and the other adventurers who hit level 7 and all but a few 6s were deployed at the foot of the wall and across the city. We felt the beast long before we saw it, like a wave of malice pressing down on us invisibly. At first it was like a small dark dot at the edge of our vision, but its speed made it grow larger and more dreadfully clear with every millisecond. Contact! I yelled as I shot off the wall to intercept the beast. The thing barely slowed down when it registered my approach and raised a scaled claw to swat at me like I was a fly. It did stop, however, when instead of turning into red mist like it seemed to expect, I sheared off one of its claws with erasure. Not that that was good for me, mind you, as the big dragon focused a single crimson slitted pupil on me and snarled as magic gathered in its chest and shot out of its mouth. Not a breath of fire, but a pillar of calamitous erasure all its own. Distilled pure destruction. I instinctively got the fuck out the way the moment it looked at me, and so wasn't erased like the 50 or so miles of land that was 1 second there and the next turned into a white-hot canyon. Author note: new Skyrim story out now. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Sally Fox audiobook.